I woke up alone in a hospital bed, broken and betrayed by the very people I trusted most, my parents. And now they were coming to take what's mine. Hey there. Welcome to today's story. I'm so glad you're here. Before we get started, take a second to relax and get ready for something really special. Today, I'm sharing a journey about a character who's been through the unimaginable, someone who's had to face the kind of betrayal that cuts to the core. It's a story of survival, of reclaiming what's rightfully theirs, and of finding strength in the most unexpected places. Can you relate to feeling lost or abandoned by those you trust most? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to rise above the pain and fight for your peace? Well, stick with me till the end, because you'll want to see how this character comes out the other side stronger than ever. And if you enjoy this story, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support truly means the world to me and motivates me to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Let's dive in.
I was always told I had a perfect childhood. At least, that's what the photo said. Growing up in a picture-perfect suburban home, surrounded by neatly manicured lawns and shiny white fences, you could never tell what was really going behind the scenes. My name is Sophia Bennett, and I grew up in a house where appearances mattered more than truth. At the age of 28, I was forced to face a reality I never could have imagined, and everything I thought I knew about family was shattered in an instant. It all started with a phone call, a call that changed everything. But before we get to that, let me give you a glimpse into my life, into the family that raised me, or at least claimed to. Growing up, I thought I was just like everyone else. I had a sister, Emily, who seemed to have it all: attention, love, validation. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was the shadow, the one always striving to prove myself. I was always the overachiever, always doing my homework without being asked, excelling at everything, yet I was never good enough in their eyes. My parents, David and Helen, were the epitome of the American dream: successful, well-dressed, and always throwing the perfect dinner parties. But behind closed doors, things were different. I remember overhearing a conversation one night when I was 12. It was a small moment, but it stayed with me forever. I had woken up in the middle of the night, needing a glass of water. That's when I heard their voices in the kitchen, low and tense. "You always favor Emily," my mother's voice was sharp, accusing. "I do not," my father responded, his tone defensive. "She's just more spirited. Sophia doesn't need anything. She's fine on her own." I froze, glass in hand. I knew, deep down, something wasn't right, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept that I wasn't truly part of this family, at least not in the way I had hoped. The next morning, I overheard another conversation, this one more explicit. "Sophia isn't ours, Helen. She was never meant to be." The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I didn't know how to process them. I was 12 years old, and I had just found out I was adopted. The truth didn't feel like a revelation. It felt like a betrayal. Suddenly, everything about me, the way I looked, the way I thought, made sense. But it was a sense I never wanted to understand. I wanted to scream, to confront them, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was too afraid. So I kept it to myself, buried it deep down. But the cracks in our relationship only grew wider, even as I tried to be the perfect daughter. I excelled academically, I started my first company at 22, and I built a life I could be proud of. But my parents remained distant, disconnected, as if they were watching someone else's life unfold. It wasn't until I was 28, when I was lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life, that the real betrayal became clear. But this time, I wouldn't stay quiet. This time, I would confront the truth I had been running from for so long, and nothing would ever be the same again. The day I found out I was adopted wasn't like any other. The shock, the disbelief, those were expected reactions. What I didn't anticipate was the crushing weight of the silence that followed. It was as if a wall had been built between me and my family, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break through. The truth had been laid bare, but it wasn't the kind of truth that set me free. No, it was a truth that confined me to a life of pretending to be the daughter they wanted, pretending I was enough. For years, I did everything right. I followed the rules. I worked hard. I made them proud. Or so I thought. But the harder I tried, the more distant they became. I used to think it was just my imagination. Perhaps I wasn't doing enough. Perhaps I wasn't good enough. But when you're constantly forced to chase something that's just out of reach, it starts to wear you down. I tried to talk to them, but the conversations never went anywhere. If I asked my mom why I didn't get the same attention Emily did, she would dismiss it with a wave of her hand, telling me I was too sensitive. My father, on the other hand, would explain that I didn't need the extra encouragement because I was naturally good at everything, while Emily needed more help. In a way, I got used to it. The unspoken rejection, the subtle differences. They always favored Emily's successes over mine. Emily got the bigger room. Emily got to choose where we went for dinner. Emily's art was framed and displayed in the living room, while mine was tucked away in a drawer. It seemed trivial, but it was the little things that piled up, making me feel like I was always second best. No, not even second best. I was invisible. The day I went off to college was supposed to be a milestone, a day of celebration, but it felt hollow. I graduated from high school with honors, got a full scholarship to MIT, and earned my degree in record time. I even started my own tech company at 22, and it was growing fast. But the more successful I became, the more distant my parents grew. I remember the day of my MIT graduation like it was yesterday. My parents were there, of course. They smiled for photos, posed for congratulatory shots, but there was something off. They never looked at me the way they looked at Emily. It was like I was some project they were managing. They could be proud of me for my accomplishments, but not because they truly loved me, not because I was their daughter. The only person who ever truly saw me for who I was, who accepted me without hesitation, was Grandmother Evelyn. She lived in a charming Victorian house in the heart of Cambridge, filled with antique furniture, dusty books, and the warm scent of cinnamon that always made me feel safe. I spent every summer with her after the revelation, as I like to call it. Grandmother Evelyn was the only one who ever made me feel like I belonged. It was at her house when I was 15 that she first mentioned my birth parents. We were sitting on the porch, drinking lemonade and watching the sunset, when she casually said, "You have your mother's eyes, you know." It was the first acknowledgement I'd ever received that my biological mother existed. I remember the way my stomach tightened when she said it, the sudden rush of emotions that hit me. Who was she? I asked, unable to stop myself. Grandma Evelyn just smiled softly and said, "Someone who loved you very much but couldn't keep you." For years, I tried to get more information from her, but every time I asked, she would put it off. "When you're older," she'd say, "when the time is right." But the time never seemed to come. I was left with questions that had no answers. I had so many feelings swirling around inside me, but there was no one to talk to. Despite everything, I kept striving for perfection. I told myself that if I could just prove to them that I was worthy of love, worthy of their attention, it would make everything better. But it never did. My success, my hard work were never enough. And it was only as I entered my 20s that I realized, truly realized, that I would never be able to earn the love I so desperately wanted from them. It wasn't until I started my tech company that I finally began to feel like I was building something that was mine. I had control over it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to please anyone. I wasn't chasing a dream of being the perfect daughter. My company was growing, and it felt real. But no matter how successful I became, my parents remained distant. My father, a successful corporate lawyer, and my mother, an impeccable hostess, continued to live their lives as if I were just a footnote in their story. Then, everything changed. The phone call came one rainy Tuesday afternoon. It was from the hospital. I had been in an accident. A car had swerved into my lane, and my vehicle had rolled over twice. I was unconscious for hours. The doctors called my family. And my parents? They didn't come. They didn't come. It was the beginning of something I couldn't have prepared for. But it wasn't until later that I realized just how far they would go to abandon me. The pain wasn't just physical. As I lay there in that sterile hospital room, unable to move, unable to speak, the one thing that stung more than my broken body was the realization that I was truly alone. I had been abandoned by my own parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, love me, and be there when I needed them most. And yet, as the hours passed and the hospital staff kept a close eye on my condition, I never heard their voices, never saw their faces. It wasn't until the doctors finally made contact with them that I learned the shocking truth. My parents hadn't just stayed away because of their work or some other excuse. No, they had actively chosen to distance themselves from me in my most vulnerable moment. They had chosen their pride, their convenience, over the life of their own daughter. The first hint of this came when I overheard a nurse talking to a doctor in the hallway. "We've tried to contact the family," she said softly, "but they're refusing to make any decisions." The doctor's voice was clear, but his words made my stomach drop. "What do you mean, refusing?" "Well," the nurse continued, "they've told us that she's not their daughter. They owe her nothing. They've already made it clear they won't authorize any treatment unless she's formally recognized as their child. They're claiming the adoption was informal." Informal? I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach out and grab someone, anyone, to make them understand the gravity of what was happening. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink without the excruciating pain that tore through my body. Instead, I just laid there, my mind racing, my thoughts spiraling. The weight of their words hung in the air, a dark cloud that seemed to suffocate me with every passing minute. It wasn't just about the surgery I desperately needed to survive. It was about the very foundation of my existence, my entire sense of identity being questioned. The people who had raised me, who had been the center of my world for 28 years, had not only abandoned me in my time of need, but they had also rejected the very truth of who I was. They didn't want to acknowledge that I was their daughter, not legally, not emotionally. To them, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. When the lawyer arrived, I was barely aware of what was happening. I could hear snippets of their conversation, muffled voices, the rustling of papers. But the words that stood out to me, the ones I will never forget, were these. "We'll have to contest this will," my father said. "We can't have her taking everything." Her? Everything? My heart clenched in disbelief. They were already planning how to seize control of my grandmother's estate, the one thing that had been left to me. And I wasn't even dead yet. I was lying in a hospital bed, clinging to life, and all they cared about was the money. And then there was that voice again, the one I had heard faintly earlier, my mother. "She isn't ours, David," she said, her voice sharp with contempt. "We don't owe her a thing." I wasn't theirs. The truth echoed in my mind, the harsh, unforgiving truth that had been thrown at me, not by some stranger, but by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. They didn't see me as their daughter. They didn't care about me. I was just a tool they had used to satisfy their own desires, to live out their perfect little life. But in their eyes, I was disposable. I couldn't understand how they could be so cold, so distant. After everything I had done for them, for this family, how could they just turn their backs on me without a second thought? The nurses kept me informed, but each time they mentioned that they had reached out to my parents and had been ignored, the sting grew deeper. Days passed, and still nothing. No phone calls, no visits. My father, the corporate lawyer who had always preached about family values, wasn't there to argue my case with the doctors. My mother, who always presented herself as the perfect hostess, was nowhere to be found. Instead, it was Olivia Turner, the nurse who had been assigned to my case, who truly cared. She spoke to me constantly, even when I couldn't respond. She kept me company when I was alone, telling me everything that was going on with my recovery, keeping me updated on the progress of my case. Olivia's kindness was a lifeline, a small beacon of light in the otherwise suffocating darkness of my situation. "She's not alone," Olivia would say, her voice gentle but firm. "We're not letting her go through this alone. We've got her back." I wanted to reach out, to thank her, but all I could do was listen. And then, finally, there was Lily Carter, my business partner and closest friend. When she arrived at the hospital, I could hear the urgency in her voice, but also the anger. She was the one who had come to my defense when I had no voice, fighting the hospital administration and even my own family. She was the one who forced them to take responsibility for their actions. Lily had been my rock when I had no strength left to stand. She came to visit every day, and when I was finally able to speak again, she told me everything. She had fought for my treatment, confronted my parents about their refusal to authorize the surgery, and secured my legal rights to the inheritance. And when it became clear that my parents were still trying to manipulate the system to steal what was rightfully mine, Lily had begun gathering evidence. The hospital footage, the security camera recordings, everything was documented. The way my parents had walked away without a second glance, the way they had rejected me, was all there for the world to see. But it wasn't just about the inheritance. It wasn't even just about the surgery. What hurt the most was that they hadn't seen me as a person. They had never truly seen me. They had seen the daughter they wanted me to be, not the one I was. And when the chips were down, they had chosen everything else, money, power, their reputation, over the daughter they had raised. Lily sat beside me, her hand on mine, as I struggled to process everything I had learned. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," she whispered. "They're not worth your energy. They don't deserve you." And for the first time since the accident, I felt a flicker of something new. Clarity. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had spent so many years chasing their acceptance, but the truth was, I was better off without it. I had my own life to live, and it was time to start living it for myself. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting for them. As the days stretched on in the sterile hospital room, I felt the fog of confusion start to lift. The doctors had given their updates on my physical progress, but come day 3, no vanla physical injuries that consume my thoughts anymore. It was the emotional wreckage left by my family's complete abandonment. The fractured ribs and the bruises on my face were nothing compared to the wounds they had left behind in my soul. They didn't want me, and it was clear that they never truly had. Every time I heard my mother's voice in my head, it made me sick to my stomach. The cold indifference she had shown me in the hospital, the way she dismissed me, rejecting me without hesitation, it haunted me. It was as if, after all these years, they had finally stripped away the mask of love and revealed the truth. They never truly saw me as their daughter. To them, I was a product of convenience, a symbol of their supposed success. But when it came down to it, when they were forced to face the responsibility of loving me, they turned their backs. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the cruelty that stung the most. I thought back to that night in the hospital when I overheard the conversation about me. "She's not our real daughter. We owe her nothing." The words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of their true feelings. No matter what I had done for them, no matter how hard I had tried, it was never going to be enough. I wasn't their biological child, and to them, that meant everything. But I was learning something important through this excruciating process. I was stronger than I had ever realized. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval, their love, or their validation. I was the one who had fought for my success. I had built a company, made a name for myself, and proven to the world that I could thrive on my own. And now, I was proving to myself that I could survive, even without the people I had once thought were my family. The first thing I did when I was strong enough to sit up was call James Wright, the attorney who had been handling my grandmother's estate. I was finally ready to take control, to do what I should have done all along. I was going to stop hiding behind their expectations. I was going to stand up for myself and claim what was rightfully mine. James arrived at the hospital the next day, briefcase in hand, looking calm and composed as usual. He had been my grandmother's lawyer for over 30 years, and I trusted him more than anyone else. He sat down beside my bed and, after a few minutes of pleasantries, got straight to the point. "We've been preparing for this moment for a while," James said, his voice steady but firm. "Your parents have filed papers to contest the will. They claim you're mentally incompetent and that your grandmother didn't understand the full scope of what she was doing when she left you the estate." I wasn't surprised by their move. It was exactly what I expected. I had known for years that they saw me as a pawn to be manipulated for their benefit. And now, even after they had abandoned me at the hospital, they were trying to take everything I had left, the inheritance, the legacy of my grandmother's love. "I'm not going to let them get away with it," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but full of resolve. "I want to fight this. I want to make sure they understand that they can't just erase me from the picture. They don't get to take everything just because they're my parents." James nodded, his expression unwavering. "I'll make sure we have everything we need. The hospital records, the security footage, and the documents proving that your adoption was legal. Everything is in order. We'll take this to court if we need to." But deep down, I knew this wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the house or the inheritance. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my identity. It was about finally standing up to the people who had treated me like I was invisible. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of property. I was fighting for the truth, for the chance to finally be seen for who I really was. As James left the room to prepare for the legal battle ahead, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I was no longer that scared little girl who had tried so hard to win her parents' love. I had become something else, something stronger, and I was ready to fight. The next few weeks were a blur. The physical therapy was painful, but I pushed through it. Every step I took, every movement I made was a reminder of how far I had come. I could feel the weight of the betrayal in my chest, but I also felt the strength that came with finally letting go. I wasn't dependent on my parents anymore. I had my own life to live, my own purpose, and no matter what happened, I would no longer let them define me. It was during this time that Lily came to visit me every day. She was the only one who had stayed by my side throughout this ordeal, the one person who never let me down. She had been my friend long before my accident, but now she was my rock, the one who gave me the support I needed when I felt like I couldn't keep going. "I've got your back, Sophia," she would say, her voice filled with the kind of sincerity I had always longed for from my family. "You're not alone in this. You've got people who care about you." It was Lily's words that helped me keep going. I couldn't have done it without her. She wasn't just a friend anymore. She had become family to me. One day, after a particularly grueling session in physical therapy, Lily and I sat down in the small garden outside the hospital. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow over everything. I hadn't been outside much, but today I felt strong enough to sit in the open air and breathe. "You know, I've been thinking," I said to Lily, watching the way the light flickered through the trees. "I spent so many years trying to get their approval. I thought if I just kept achieving, kept doing everything right, they'd finally love me. But I've realized that it doesn't matter anymore. I can't keep running after something that's never going to happen." Lily looked at me with understanding in her eyes. "You're right. They don't get to control your worth. You're already amazing just the way you are. You don't need their approval. You've already proven everything you need to prove. I smiled, a sense of peace settling over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control. I had been through hell, but I was still standing, and that's what mattered. The legal battle raged on, but my body was healing, and more importantly, so was my heart. With each passing day, I grew stronger physically, and I began to feel a sense of clarity I had never experienced before. The pain from my broken ribs, fractured collarbone, and traumatic brain injury was slowly but steadily fading into the background. But the real healing, the kind that went far beyond any physical ailment, was happening deep inside me. I had spent so many years living in the shadows of my family's expectations, constantly fighting for their approval, desperately trying to prove I was worthy of love. But now, as I stood on the precipice of reclaiming my inheritance, I realized I was fighting for something much bigger than a piece of property. I was fighting for my own identity, for the right to exist on my own terms, to define who I was, without the weight of my parents' rejection hanging over me. The day the court ruled in my favor, I was sitting in the small, cramped office of James Wright, my grandmother's attorney. He had been a constant presence throughout this entire ordeal, offering not just legal advice, but also the kind of understanding and compassion that I had been craving for so long. I had come to trust him like a second father, someone who actually cared about me as a person, not just as a legal client. "We've won," James said, his voice steady as he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "The judge has ruled in your favor. Your parents' claim to the estate is null and void. The house, the assets, they're all yours." For a moment, I felt a rush of relief. My parents had failed. They had tried to take everything from me, my inheritance, my sense of self, and my very identity, but they hadn't succeeded. They had underestimated my resolve, my strength. They had underestimated me. But then, something else happened, something that took me by surprise. It was a feeling of emptiness, a void. For the first time in months, I wasn't sure what came next. I had fought so hard for this moment, for this victory, but now that it was here, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. I had lost my family. The very people who had raised me, who had promised to love me unconditionally, had not only rejected me, but had also tried to destroy me when I needed them most. I had always dreamed of a moment when I would finally prove myself, when I would finally stand tall and show them I was worthy of their love. But now that it was over, I had to face the harsh reality. They were never going to change. I would never get the love and acceptance I had hoped for. And that's when I understood something profound. I didn't need their approval anymore. Not to survive, not to thrive. I had been chasing after a dream that wasn't mine to hold on to. And the moment I stopped chasing it, I felt the weight of years of grief, of rejection, begin to lift. I had built a new life for myself, one that didn't depend on my parents' validation. I had created a family, not by blood, but by choice. People like Lily Carter, my business partner, and Olivia Turner, my nurse, had become my true family. They were the ones who had been there for me, who had cared for me when no one else would. They were the ones who saw me for who I truly was, not the image of what my parents wanted me to be. The phone call I received from Emily, my biological sister, was the turning point. We had barely spoken since the Thanksgiving dinner where everything fell apart. She had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. But now, with everything laid bare, she was beginning to see the truth. She had seen the video, read the letter, and understood the extent of my parents' betrayal. "I'm sorry, Sophia," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. I never knew how much you were hurting, how much they were hurting you." I sat there, stunned. For years, I had longed for my sister's approval, for her to see me, to understand the pain I had endured. And now, here she was, finally acknowledging the truth. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. It never could be. But it was a start. A small step toward healing, toward rebuilding the bond that had been severed so long ago. "I've always known," I said quietly, my voice steady but full of weight. "I've always known that they loved you more. I just wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be enough. But I was never going to be enough for them, Emily. I was never going to be their perfect daughter." She didn't answer right away, but I could hear the soft sob in her throat, the ache of understanding. After that conversation, things began to change between us. Slowly but surely, we started to build a new kind of relationship. It wasn't about the past. It wasn't about the things that had been broken beyond repair. It was about moving forward, finding common ground, and learning to love each other in ways we hadn't before. But it wasn't just Emily. It was everyone who had been by my side. The people who saw me, who believed in me, who didn't require me to be perfect to love me. Lily, who had stayed with me through the hardest moments. Olivia, who had been my lifeline when I couldn't even speak. James, who had given me hope when I thought all was lost. These were the people who had become my family, the ones who mattered. As I walked out of the courthouse after the final ruling, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. True freedom. I was free from the weight of my past, free from the people who had tried to define me, free from the expectations that had held me hostage for so long. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I still had to rebuild my life, find my purpose, and continue my journey of healing. But now, I was doing it on my own terms. I didn't need to be anyone else's idea of perfect. I was enough, just as I was. And as I stood there, looking out over the city that had been my home for so long, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The rest of my life was waiting for me, and for the first time, I was ready to take it on, fully and unapologetically, as myself.
So, what do you think about this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, and any reflections you have. Was there a moment that stood out to you, or perhaps something you could relate to? Drop your comments below and let's talk about it. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my journey. Thank you for being part of this. Stay tuned for more because the story never really ends.